How did the Constitution create a federal system of government? This is the Swiss Bundesrat, or parliament. What form of government does Switzerland have? How does it differ from ours? Switzerland is a direct democracy. The United States has a federal system with a representative democracy. The difference between a direct democracy and a representative democracy would be by which way the people are involved. In a direct democracy, the people have a direct say in government, unlike in a representative form of government, which the people get to only elect our representatives to represent us.
Direct democracy is democracy in a literal sense, whereby the people directly make decisions. This is what happened in one of the earliest conceptions of democracy in ancient Athens, where citizens were entitled to vote on every matter affecting them in mass meetings. They were made more manageable by the fact that women and slaves were excluded from citizenship. This form of democracy isn't really going to work in a large modern society. It's hard to see how people have the time, inclination, or knowledge to be able to vote on potentially loads of different laws per day. Having said that, one form of direct democracy is the occasional use of a referendum, which is a vote on a single issue, such as the 2016 vote on Britain's EU membership. Given that direct democracy is, practically, almost impossible to achieve in today's societies, a different form of democracy operates. Representative democracy is sometimes known as indirect democracy and means that people choose representatives to make decisions on their behalf, these being politicians. Representatives are chosen through regular, competitive, free and fair elections. Representatives should be responsive to voters' needs, as if they are not, they can be voted out at the next election. This ensures that people's views are really being represented accurately. So, the main difference is that direct democracy is the people deciding directly, whereas representative democracy is where a representative decides for the people.
How do some nations organize their governments? Not all nations organize government in the same way. Some nations have a unitary form of government, yet other nations have a form of government called a confederation.
You grow bored of sailing the Pacific and decide to check in on your islander friends. You know, the ones that were fighting over a silly pile of coconuts. They greet you with smiles and a bunch of questions. They tell you a nearby island has sugarcane and another has cocoa. Both are quite delicious with coconuts. The three islands have traded for years, and the islanders want to include them in their new government. How can we do this, they ask. With a system of government, you reply. You explain they need to work with other islands to manage all of their unique laws and leaders. There's a couple of ways to do this. One way is with a unitary government. That means one central government on one of the islands would make decisions that affect all three islands. Each island would have a smaller government with limited powers and functions defined by the central government. Nations in Europe and Africa have unitary governments. There's also a confederation, which is a group of loosely allied states. A confederation's central government is weak and only has certain powers that the states agree to give it. Confederations usually are formed to meet a specific need, like defense or common currency. This would be ideal for your island because you wouldn't have to change local laws. Also, the three islands could easily band together to fight off any chocolate coconut candy stealing pirates.
What is a federal system of government? A federal government is a system of dividing up power between a central government that are connected to one another by a national government. How do these three types of governments differ in the distribution of power? Federal system. A federal government is a system of dividing up power between a central national government and local state governments that are connected to one another by a national government. Parliamentary system. A parliamentary system is a democratic form of government in which the party, or coalition of parties, with the greatest representation in parliament, forms a government, its leader becoming prime minister. Direct system. Direct democracy allows the voters in a state to write laws, amend constitutions, remove politicians from office, and approve decisions made by government. Initiatives are laws or constitutional amendments on the ballot. Which powers are delegated to the states and federal government? Powers that are shared between the states and the national government are called delegated powers or express powers. Examples: coining money, establishing post offices, regulating commerce, raising and maintaining armed forces, and declaring war. This is President Franklin Roosevelt signing the Congressional Declaration of War against Japan on December 8, 1941. Why do you think that only the federal government has the authority to engage in war? I believe that only the federal government has the authority to engage in war because if the states had the authority to declare war, it would be a possibility that they could declare war in between them. Why do you think state governments are not allowed to tax imports or exports? Why is the federal government not allowed to tax exports? I believe that state governments are not allowed to tax imports or exports because if each state had 50 different trading policies and 50 different taxing regulations, the national government would have no control over the states, meaning that we would no longer be a federal government. What powers does the Constitution deny the federal and state governments? The Constitution denies the federal government to tax exports, spend money in a way that is not approved by law, enact laws that favor one state over the other, exercise powers that belong to the states, suspend the writ of habeas corpus except in a national emergency. The Constitution denies the state governments to tax imports or exports, keep an army or navy in times of peace, engage in war. The Constitution denies both federal and state governments to enact ex post facto laws or bills, clear the right to a jury, grant titles of nobility. Which part of government would negotiate treaties among nations requiring them to pass laws to clean up the air and water? The federal government would negotiate treaties. What is the Supremacy Clause? The Supremacy Clause says that when a federal law and a state law disagree, the federal law overrides the state law. How do local laws affect education? The laws that affect schools and students are based on a balance of rights and responsibility. How has the relationship between federal and state governments changed? Today, the federal government has far more power over the state governments. Explain the major differences between a unitary form of government and a confederation. The major difference between a unitary government and a confederation is that the unitary form of government is one where the central government controls the states and local government, and a confederation is where states have complete control of themselves. The sovereign people decide how to delegate their authority. What is a federal system? A federal government is a system of dividing up power between a central national government and a local state government that are connected to one another by the national government. The 10th Amendment of the Constitution, on the other hand, gave all other powers to the states. What powers does the Constitution give the federal government? The Constitution gives the federal government power to coin money, regulate commerce, declare war, to raise and maintain armed forces, and to establish a post office. What powers belong to the states? The Constitution gave the states power to collect taxes, build roads, borrow money, establish courts, make and enforce laws, charter banks and corporations, and spend money for the general welfare. What powers do the state and federal government share? Many powers belonging to the federal government are shared by the state governments. Such powers are called concurrent powers. These include the power to tax, spend, and borrow money. State governments operate their own judicial systems, charter corporations, provide public education, and regulate property rights. What powers did the people keep for themselves? Some powers that we kept for ourselves are the right to believe in what we wish, form or join organizations, select our careers and live our lives as we choose, pick our friends, travel where we wish, to go inside or outside of the country, raise a family. Which powers does the Constitution deny the federal government? Some powers, such as the power to levy duties on exports or prohibit the freedom of religion, speech, press, or assembly, are expressly denied to the national government in the Constitution. Also, some powers are denied to the national government because the Constitution is silent on the issue. What powers does the Constitution deny to the state governments? States cannot form alliances with foreign governments, declare war, coin money, or impose duties on imports or exports. Why is the Supremacy Clause important? The Supremacy Clause is the most important grantor of the national union. It ensures that the Constitution and federal laws and treaties take precedence over state law and binds all judges to adhere to the principle in their courts.
Originally, the federal idea was kind of like a layered cake. So this is my best attempt at drawing a quick layered cake, where you could view each layer as one of the layers of government. So when I cut open that cake, maybe right over here, this blue layer right over here, it's blue flavored cake, maybe it's an ice cream cake of some kind. That might be the federal government. Then this yellow, maybe it's mango flavored. That would be the state government. And then you have your strawberry flavored local government. That is one view of federalism, but it turns out in the United States, especially over the passage of time, this has gotten mixed up a little bit. So even though the United States might have started a little bit closer to something like this layered cake, today it is more of a marble cake, where the different layers and their powers are more mixed together. And so that's my attempt to drawing these the mixing of these various powers. And not only do they mix, they overlap. That different layers of our federal government, some have exclusive powers, which means that's the only layer that has them, while sometimes there are concurrent powers, which means these are powers that multiple layers might actually have. Now, to appreciate what these exclusive and concurrent powers are, here's a Venn diagram that shows some of them. So on the left-hand side right over here, you have your exclusive federal powers. So in the United States, only the federal government can coin money. You can't have money from Texas or California. Only the federal government can declare war, which is related to the idea of conducting foreign affairs, which once again, only the federal government can do. That's also related to raising armies. Once again, only the federal government. Rules of naturalization. Who becomes an immigrant? Who gets a green card? Who becomes a citizen? All determined by the federal government, not by the states. And the federal government regulates not just foreign affairs, but foreign commerce, trade agreements, and how is trade done? They're regulating between the states. Now, exclusive powers to the states, they conduct elections. You might say, wait, hold on a second. Well, aren't there federal elections? Well, it turns out even for, say, election for a president, the elections are conducted by the state government. Remember, we have the Electoral College. They want to figure out who should that state's electors vote for. Establishing local governments. What are the counties? What are the various jurisdictions within a state? Similarly, intrastate commerce, that's regulated by the state. What about the commerce that happens within the state? And then the Constitution allows the states to be the main power in ratifying constitutional amendments. The Senate and House can propose amendments, but 3/4 of the states have to vote to ratify constitutional amendments. Now, what we see in the middle of this Venn diagram, these are concurrent powers, which means that they are common to both federal and state governments. You can have federal taxes and you can have state taxes. In fact, most of us have both. There are federal laws and there are state laws. Similarly, there's federal law enforcement. You can think of the FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigation, and of course you have state police and local police. The chartering of banks, eminent domain, which we might do another video on in the future, but this is the idea that a government can view taking land as the interest of the broader good in order to put down power lines or a highway and ideally compensate the people that it takes from if it's for the greater good. Establishing courts. You have a federal court system and a state court system, which we'll talk more about in future videos. And borrowing money. They both can issue bonds if they want to have a large project or to finance their deficit. All of these things are concurrent powers. Now, this list is not exhaustive for any one of the three. For the exclusive federal powers, the concurrent powers, so I'll do this ... here, and the exclusive state powers. And one thing that you will see, even certain exclusive state powers, so for example, education, is, for the most part, considered an exclusive state power. But then you might say, hold on a second, isn't there a federal Department of Education? I'll do that over here. And this is a good example of how the federal government, even when something might be more of an exclusive state power, where the federal government can still influence it. And they do that through grants. So even though the states and local governments might run the schools, the federal government might say, hey, if you do X, Y, and Z, which we want you to do, then we will give you more funding for your schools. And so that might be motivation for the states to listen to the federal government.